Hey guys, so don't pay attention to the two tabs on the top. That was for video that I was gonna do right now or today, but um, something came to my mind early this morning, and I really wanted to think about it, and I decided to do that video instead. So that's why I've Atlas open. That's why you see those two tabs. So I'm not gonna really use Atlas. I got a few notes here that I'm gonna read from, a few key points. So the question that came to my mind was, should federal law enforcement exist? And that's a very good question for college students to see where their minds are at. So I thought about this, and I know that in the 20th century, that's the 1900s, in that era of things, period of time, it changed a lot. And we're going to go through this. So I got my notes right here. And so George Washington, as you may or may not know, he created the U.S. Marshals. And they're good, you know. If you don't know who they reside in federal courts, which is federal jurisdiction, and they follow court orders. Like, they carry out the warrants or you've seen them. You know, they grab people and take them to court, or they arrest them. You know the story. If you know U.S. Marshals. There's also the U.S. Park Service. You know, they enforce laws on federal land, which are designated as parks. And they also do, you know, Yellowstone, even outside of park area, which is kind of iffy, but they do work over there by, I can't remember that group of, that area is called over there, but it's over there by, where the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument are located. That area. Not the is that part of the National Mall? I guess it's part of the National Mall, but they don't work over there between Congress and at least I haven't seen them over there. But they definitely are seen drawn around over there next to the Washington Monument. And if you're talking about ideologies and such, libertarians would probably accept that. And they would end there. But where it gets iffy is at the U.S. Secret Service. And this is why I have T here. The Secret Service was started to protect the U.S. Treasury, the integrity of the U.S. Treasury Department. Well, at the time, it wasn't the Treasury Department, it was. I don't believe it was the department. But I'm talking about the actual U.S. Treasury. Because in a post-Civil War, there was counterfeiting going on with the money. So it was put into effect by Abraham Lincoln. And today it's ironic because now you associate the Secret Service with protecting the president, because after 9/11 of 2001, September 11th, 2001, it protected the area around the White House, and most notably the president, which is ironic. And I knew that people would probably not believe me that it would be ironic. Is the Secret Service ironic? Yeah, there's a sense of irony there. If you mean the Secret Service, yes, it's ironic in a very real way. The quote secret, yeah. That's not what I meant. ChatGPT isn't the smartest. They're quite secret, yet one of the most visible federal agencies. Yeah, that's true too. They got their own vehicles and everything. And if you do a crime anywhere around the White House area, you're going to get arrested by the Secret Service. And then they're going to transfer you to somebody else. Um, I said I meant the inception of Abraham Lincoln and what it is known for now. Yes, the irony is real sharp, historically precise. Abraham Lincoln authorized the creation of the Secret Service on April 14th, 1865. Interesting, it's April 14th of 1865. Um, its original purpose had nothing to do with protecting presidents. It was created to combat counterfeiting, which was wrecking the pro-Civil War economy. Lincoln was assassinated that very night. He died on April 14th. He died the same day as Secret Service. I gotta Google that. Yeah. April 15th of 1865, he was assassinated in Washington, D.C. It's also interesting that he served from March 4th of 1861. You know, March 5th, April 14th. These are very important dates. If you know, you know. In 2033, March 5th is a recurring thing that I've been talking about, and then there's April 14th, which it has been recurring. So that's interesting. Very interesting. He never benefited from the agency he set in motion. Presidential protection didn't become the Secret Service role until 1901. Oh! I thought it was 2001. I guess maybe it was the White House that was protected in 2001. Maybe that's, unless that's included in 1901. Because I thought it was 2001. Presidential protection had become the Secret Service's role after the assassination of McKinley, after another president killed while in office. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I knew that. I just kind of associated with 2001. So the irony runs deep. An agency created under Lincoln exists today primarily to prevent the exact kind of death Lincoln suffered, but too late for him. And it has nothing to do with the Treasury anymore. Although you could say the economy of what represents the president, you know, the White House in that area. So it's, say that's a stretch or reach, but it's in that realm of things. Even more pointed, it was born out of economic integrity. It became defined by personal protection. And its identity today is shaped by violence it failed to protect in its own origin story. Although, like I said, in D.C., Secret Service arrests people for committing crimes around the White House. So this isn't entirely complete. That's not coincidence. That's institutional evolution driven by trauma. So I got another note here. The FBI is utterly useless. I don't really know why the FBI exists. I mean, I know that what they do and what they're capable of, but if you actually understand federal power, they're useless in that sense of things. Because on paper, it sounds great and powerful, but in reality, it's a few woods in a world of 5,000 coulds. And what I mean by that is, they could prevent, for example, someone from doing a crime, even let's say if it's an attempt. You could have a school shooter walk through a door and clearly what they hold is have a gun. And they could intervene. They could have all the messages, they could have all the they could stop someone from committing a crime or even attempt to commit a crime if they have intention to commit that crime or if it was premeditated. But the United States court system doesn't work that way. And at least on the federal level, you could make an argument that said, well, then you have to get the county involved, the city, the state, if you have to. But the FBI will be there within the next 5 minutes of a crime occurring, and they're going to do investigations and all that. So, but you have to realize that the United States cannot, the federal government, not the United States, the federal government can only get away with preemptive strikes if you're at a war in a foreign country. Not the federal court systems going to war against each other when it undermines both themselves. Philosophically, philosophically and conceptually to favor a criminal. So in other words, the federal government couldn't say, well, we're going to do something, but it creates a problem for courts to say, well, how do you know that you want them to commit a crime? Because a crime, that's another thing too. If someone commits a crime, it's a greater evidence against someone beyond just premeditation, or even if you're saying that someone's going to attempt to do something. Evidence and them actually carrying it out is a much more, you can prove that much more than you could do. It's just how the criminal system works. So they could do 5,000 reasons to do something, but only a few of those could actually be carried out. They have all the technology and everything, but we live in a society that believes that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. But if you flip that, even as bad as it might sound, I guess depending on who's in control. But if you instead had a criminal system, a justice system, court system that automatically has a baseline where everyone is guilty, then you could do stuff like that. Then you wouldn't have as much evidence where they commit a crime, and you could just bring them in the courtroom and say, hey, what's the evidence for this? And they look at it. And you would think that's how the court system works already, but they don't give punishments out. They don't give out more punishment for someone attempting to do something or about to do something if they haven't actually done it, or they haven't done what is required or prerequisite to have a harsher sentence. So it's just how things are. So what about ICE? The immigration and customs enforcement, which, here's the thing. It came to be by President Bush after 2001, of course, for it was really not there's a whole bunch of problems with ICE. First of all, it wasn't based on people immigrating to America. That's not what it was created for. Or from, I should say. It was created from so-called terrorists coming to, the event of 9/11 in 2001. That's why it was created, and was created on March 1st it was put in operation on March 1st of 2003. March 1st is, I'm going to talk about March 1st. March 1st, that's going to happen in the future. Um, and a part of me wants to laugh at this. Another part of me wants me to feel sorry for everybody. So, this is, we're gonna have to get deep here. So, I laugh for the conservatives. I laugh at them for what they're doing. And liberals doing their protests and all that, that's not gonna do anything. I'm gonna tell you a better way to do this. In my understanding of how everything is going and how everything, even before ICE, Americans don't deserve a country. They don't. They don't. You know, they're a danger to themselves. They don't understand what's going on. They don't see the outside world. That's not everybody. I put people who are in America in two camps, at least in the United States. You got one side that are Americans. You got one side that's United States citizens. United States citizens are people that I define as people who only see things in the lens of the United States. They don't see they see things based on how the president would see them or how the government would see things. Like, for example, the president say that China is an enemy or Russia is an enemy or whatever, you know. Americans would see their placements in the region, like in North America. They see the placement between Canada, Mexico, and they see different things about how the world works. You know, Europe, Asia, Middle East, and they make their own conclusions. United States citizens, on the other hand, they only take what they see on TV based on ideology and what should be talked about in politics. And Americans are beyond politics. And that's how I separate the two in my mind. And you can say that the United States citizens don't deserve a country. Americans don't necessarily need a country. They can be anywhere. And that's a very hard line between the two. And I will say that for conservatives, I do support ICE, but not for the same reasons they do. And you can bet money on that. Because what I support ICE for is something that you would, if conservatives knew what was going on, they'd be like, no, we can't do this. But I know that's something that they can't handle. And I'm trying to say certain things, preventing saying certain things, because people are going to say I'm a conspiracy theorist and all this, so I gotta say things in a very specific way, so people don't think that. But when it comes to ICE, conservatives don't realize that in a sick way, they're talking themselves into a trap. I'm not talking about sick as in cool. I'm talking about sick as in twisted. And they're being manipulated. They're manipulating themselves to have this rhetoric that ICE is doing a good job. ICE is doing a good job in a certain situation, but it's not what they think it is. So, have it written right here. It's a lot. So there's defense attorneys in state courts, even county courts, and probably possibly city courts as well, that try to overturn ICE. Now let me talk about what I mean. I'm going to read this and I'm going to explain. Even with clear exploits to law of what ICE can do, and it's never worked. And on top of that, ICE decides if they should listen to the judges. We're going to go into this. Judges don't touch it because the only court that can challenge ICE is the Supreme Court because it's a federal law enforcement. And they're never, and ICE would never go to the Supreme Court because you would favor for national. It's the same reason why the FBI would never go to do a court if it favored the victim. The only time that has ever been that's going to change is with Tyler Robinson. He's forced them to do it because of ideologies. They wouldn't normally do it, but because of conservatives, they have no choice. So, right. But they would never do it on, and now they were never preemptive. They weren't preemptive, but they were going to push it harder than what the state can do. And the only thing that would actually come out of that it's more harsher than the state would be the death penalty. If the state is bringing the death penalty. That's the only conclusion you could ever have. And that's not justice, that's not due process, but it is what it is. And by the time you do get ICE challenging the Supreme Court, the person who brought that, trying to appeal, they're long gone. They're long deported. So there is a certain exploit with ICE, but how it works is if a person is going to court, they get a handler of sorts where they act as the middleman between a state court and deportation, whatever the federal court is deciding to do. Well, I don't even know if federal court, because ICE can do things. They can. I'm sure there's ways they can. They don't even have to go to federal court, but they're pretty bad. And I don't mean that in like an evil way. I mean that in a pretty, like, intense way. I know I'm doing a lot of hand movements. So yeah, you get it's kind of a handler between the prosecutor and so what a judge can do is they can do what is known as a bail, they can issue a bench warrant which tells the person to come in front of the judge. Now, if there's a nice detainee who gets a bench warrant, it's up to the person who's handling the case between of the ICE detainee to allow them to see the judge in a city, state, or county court. And most of the time it's not because they've got other crimes and such. But usually, even if they get defense on the state level or city level, ICE is going to deport them anyway, so it doesn't even really matter. So they got that power. And there were defense attorneys that have tried. There's known as the, what is it? I think it's the 45 or 48 day. What? No, wait. I think it's the 48 hour rule. Let's get ChatGPT. This is a good time to use ChatGPT. Wording noise. Let's So I'm asking ChatGPT, what is the 48 hour rule we're going to guess? I think it's 48 hours. And defense attorneys have always tried to do this, and it's never worked. So here it is. The 48-hour rule, or ICE, refers to ICE detainers, also called immigration holds. What the 48-hour rule is, when ICE issues a detainer to your local or state jail, it is asking that jail to hold a person for up to 48 hours after they would otherwise be released, so ICE can take custody. The 48 hours do not include weekends or federal holidays, so in practice it can stretch longer. The clock starts only after the person is eligible for release, bond posted, charges dropped, sentence completed. It is not a criminal warrant, it is an administrative request. What ICE can and cannot do. ICE cannot hold someone indefinitely on a detainer. ICE cannot force local jails to comply after court rulings. ICE must assume custody within that 48-hour window, or the person must be released. Why this rule exists? The rule exists because of constitutional limits. Holding someone longer without a judge's warrant risks violating the Fourth Amendment. Courts have ruled that over-detention exposes local government to lawsuits. Many jurisdictions refuse ICE detainers entirely, like sanctuary policies. What you hear about so others comply selectively. Lawsuits have occurred when people were held beyond 48 hours. The irony, since you've been tracking those themes, ICE's most commonly used tool is time-limited, non-binding, and constitutionally fragile, which means enforcement depends less on raw authority and more on cooperation, timing, and jurisdictional consent. Now, I was watching a court case about this, and what happened was, you can see a loophole in here if you're eagle-eyed. Let me see. Let me get my notes. I actually minimized it. So let's read this part again. When ICE issues a detainer to a local or state jail, it is asking that jail to hold a person. So the person is being held in a jail because ICE says so. But here's the thing. For up to 48 hours after they would otherwise be released, so ICE can take custody. There's been an exploit. Someone's trying to exploit this. It was an immigration lawyer. And you're always trying to help your defense. You know, you want to make sure it's due process. And this is where the conflict is. It does violate due process in the court system when ICE does this. So, think of this situation. So, if you issue a bench warrant where a judge has to see you, you're going to be held on bond in a jail, right? So, after 48, so this was the thing. After 48 hours of being on bond, hang on. I thought my phone was ringing. So after 48 hours of being on bond and in paying bond, and he's in jail, 48 hours later, he should be set free. And again, that's an interpretation of the law. And even if a judge agreed with that logic, they're not the Supreme Court. And this is not right. It's conflict. But this is the power that ICE has over the state courts, all the courts. And why would you? And the big question is, why would you even have a 48-hour rule if you couldn't use that as a defense? So yeah, they would be released 48 hours because ICE isn't there and it's a bench warrant, then they can theoretically be set free. Yeah, so let's say that if you were in jail and you had a bench warrant, and you posted bond, could you go for release without ICE detaining you again? I mean, ICE could theoretically stand right there next to the jailhouse and say, "Hey, there's an immigrant, and we got to take him back and deport him." So you get in the same situation. So yeah, it's that's a wild loophole. But it didn't work, of course, but theoretically it could temporarily, maybe for the first 3 minutes. And conservatives say they should do all that. You know, going back to what I was saying before with the courts, that these immigrants shouldn't be able to have a defense because they're immigrants. Conservatives say they should do all that. But here's the problem you don't consider. If we're speaking socially, if enforced by the president, if the president sends ICE to a city or a state, well, it would have to be a city, of course, because a state is not a city. It has to be within a state, which is a city, or even a county. But, so, it's what used to be judges are now governors. And governors can't fight back because the conservatives giving ICE unlimited power at that time. And governors can only say, well, you got to get out of here. You got to get out of here. But conservatives are the foundation of ICE. So, yeah, conservatives are being manipulated. Yes, protesting is useless. But I'll tell you a way out of this. ICE has one job. Now, to believe in what ICE is, you have to believe in one thing. You have to believe in this thing known as the U.S. Interior. And that's what they enforce, the protection of U.S. Interior. It's not a concept in the Constitution or defined in the Constitution. It's a public perception of whatever the U.S. is seen as. Like, what makes up the United States? What's the territory of the United States? So, let's go back to the U.S. Marshals, where the Marshals were in federal courts, in federal jurisdictions, in their area, doing their space. The Park Service, they're in the federal land. They're doing their job. But now you have law enforcement that can enforce laws, whatever it sees as the United States, even those outside of federal jurisdictions. Domestically, that's state and city. It effectively bypasses the 10th Amendment, making it irrelevant. And I got there in my note right here. So, to the future, thanks to brainless conservatives, the presence of ICE desensitizes federal powers in cities and states, making them beneficiaries of the United States territory they see as America. This is coming. And conservatives are the backbone of it. And that's why I support 100%, because it locks down the godforsaken country to hell. It completely locks it down. No more planes, no more cruise ships. No one comes in, no one goes out. Immigration policy. It wasn't about terrorism. It would say terrorist and custom enforcement. It wasn't about immigration. Immigration prevents you from leaving and go, and they do that to the U.S. territory. If they can do it to someone who's out of this country, imagine what they can do when you're inside the country. You know. So, and that makes sense to what I've been saying this entire time. I knew what ICE was, but I didn't really think about it. Like, okay, who's between the people and DC if CIA was in charge of control of DC? So here's what I have. Let me go ahead and that's a notification for the next video, for this the Ukraine video, and I'm postponing it. That I'm setting a reminder. Anyways, so when the CIA gets DC, ICE takes everything else. The reason why that is because DC isn't a state, and because Congress violated the Residence Act of 1790, which is it called, the Residence Act? I always forget what it's called. It's the act of establishing the temporary and permanent state seat of the government of the United States. Interesting. Is that temporary? Oh, Congress set Philadelphia as the temporary capital. Okay. Then the permanent seat was supposed to be Washington, D.C. Okay, I got it. So, I think you can see this on your screen. Yeah. Alright. I read this. The act resolved intense political debate over whether the national capital should be and ensured the U.S. government would operate in a district it directly controlled, not inside any one state. So, it says it's not the Residence Act of 1790, right? What? It says that it looks like there's no really known federal law called the Residence Act of 1970. Oh, 1790. Sorry, got my numbers confused there. I was like, Residence Act of 17. I was like, Residence Act. I was like, I thought it was just restating. Yeah, I had the year wrong. Yeah, it's 1790. So, because Congress violated that, DC isn't a valid entity. That was because they gave Virginia back the retroceded land that Virginia gave to DC to make it through the Residence Act of 1790. They didn't even veto it. They just said, okay, Congress said, we'll give it back democratically. They said, we'll give you back your land, which violated and pretty much made useless the 1790. And DC has always been outside of U.S. jurisdiction as far as territory is. So what would happen is it would make its own independent country. DC would become its own independent country with the CIA in charge of DC, and ICE would get everything else outside of DC. With the exception of Texas, because Texas will be independent when this happens. But here's the good news about this. As bad as that may sound, and here's why I support this. The good news is it beats the alternative. I'm reading this, by the way. A conservative-controlled government that declares itself more powerful than anyone else. Entitlement. Saying that the world needs to follow itself. Their beliefs actually become actionable. An ideological leader in command of the United States, which would be the Charlie Kirks of the world. That would be your alternative. So would you rather have the federal government take over, or would you have an ideological leader that says this is the way it's going to be? We can throw people in prison. We can give a death penalty for people who are liberals. We can give the death penalty to who's a Republican or a conservative or Democrat, whatever you are. If we don't agree with you, we can give you the death penalty if you hurt one of our own. Would you like that? Because of Tyler Robinson. So it's all coming together. It's very interesting how this just all comes together like this. So on March 1st, 2030, what I mentioned would happen in the future, that happens on March 1st of 2033. That this transition begins. A complete lockdown. March 5th is when, and I didn't mention this before, and I said I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it now. The flag, so the United States flag will lower on March 5th of 2033. And what will replace that flag will be the DC flag. DC takes control of DC under the guidance of the CIA. And everyone else outside the United States, well, outside of DC, is defined as the United States and is under the management of ICE. They are the beneficiaries of ICE, with the exception of Texas. And here's the way to avoid that, and it's simple for Americans. Americans, not United States citizens. Now, United States citizens may read the signs, and that's why I make these videos. It's not about saving America, saving the United States. It's about giving people the opportunity to see things before they happen. Because I don't see anyone else doing that. You know, it's just it's not that I want to do it. It's not that I choose to do it. It's just there are people out there who wouldn't see it otherwise if the channel didn't exist. So, but there's a way to avoid all of this. And you have to outplay ICE. And I already mentioned how you're going to do that. I said that the planes that Maria will fly back into the United States from Ukraine, travel over Russia, it's all psychological. People are going to think of ways that they can't go. They don't want to get shot down by Russia. They don't want to, if you're American, you think, well, I might get shot down by Russia. I'm on a Ukraine plane. They don't like us. They don't like me. And yeah, it's a psychological thing. But what is it worth to you? What is your freedom worth to you? So, how do you outplay ICE? Guys, you immigrate. You immigrate from America. You immigrate from the United States. You go to another country to live. And there will be opportunity for that. But of course, there's going to be challenges to do that. Because you could be in a conservative household. And you say you want to go live somewhere in a foreign country. Yeah, you're going to get made fun of. They're going to say you traitor. It's better if you stayed in America. You don't know what's over there. You're exaggerating. It's not going to be that way. The grass isn't green on the other side. So many of these things. And as people leave, the federal government will start saying things. Even the president will say, the people who leave the United States, they're going to ruin whatever other country they're going to. And the conservatives will believe that because the grass isn't green on the other side. And they're going to believe this. This is manipulation. But then when other people read that, they're going to see, oh, well, that's manipulation, and they're going to leave. And then it starts this snowball effect. Now, you can't save everybody. But it starts a snowball effect where government will also say, well, if they leave, it just makes us stronger because we're the loyalists. We're the nationalists. And eventually what happens at that point is that the United States becomes a movement. Not just a constitution or a country. It becomes a movement where other countries want to lock them down because they're missing the bigger picture. And once that happens, you won't be able to just leave like I said, they're going to lock down the country. What you would have to do, this is what you do. You have to go to DC. You have to get a permit and all these things. And you got to prove to them why you should leave. Now, most Americans wouldn't go well, United States citizens, sorry for saying Americans, most United States citizens wouldn't go to D.C. because that's where the federal government lives, and they would blame all of this on them. So they would never dare to go to D.C. And so in their mind, they think that the United States and D.C. are the same thing, but it isn't. But they don't tell you that. So you go to D.C. You go to the place where they can do all this stuff. And you got to prove to them why you should leave. Why you're able to leave. And the trick to that is you have to speak in a way that you've already left the country. That you already live in where you won't cause problems, or you won't speak ideologies and all this. Where you understand your place with Europe, Russia, Asia, Middle East. And that you're not going to be a problem. And speak all this U.S. rhetoric, or that's going to cause problems. So, you have a chance to leave before that, but if you were never going to be that person to begin with, you would never leave. You'd be in the conservative spot. Liberals would understand this. I see that liberals would be, well, if I have a chance to leave the country, they will leave the country. It would say, well, if I can leave the country, I will leave the country. If the housing and separate point, it's another interesting thing about this. I just thought about this actually. Greenland is made of ice. No, Greenland, ice. But what's interesting about Greenland is they have free housing, free health care. They have the paid vacation days, whatever else. And what people don't know now is that in 2030, to incentivize Americans to go to Ukraine, Ukraine will also give free housing, free education, and all this other stuff. And people will say, well, they're just traitors. I'm not American. I'm sorry for saying American like that. I'm sorry, I meant to say United States. People in the United States, citizens who see the United States as the United States, they're anti-globalist, all of that. Well, conservatives are anti-global. Anyways, they're going to hate that. And Ukraine is just going to give every reason why not to stay in America. That's part of America, at least. And, yeah, that's how you play ice, is to immigrate. Immigrate to another country. And that's going to be Ukraine. So, yeah, it's interesting how all that comes together. I won't say that it was a plan to have a Charlie Kirk. Because Charlie Kirk, you have to have a very specific mind to do that. You can't just be, let's just put this guy in charge. I don't think it went down like that. I think that everything is based on something else. Like, for example, like I said earlier, if you believe in ICE, you would also have to believe in the U.S. interior, which doesn't exist constitutionally. You can believe it exists because it's territory. You would say that makes sense on paper on a surface level, but constitutionally and legally, it means nothing. You know, you have the Department of the Interior. That means, it could mean anything. So, yeah. So, that's how you checkmate ICE, and it's better than protesting. Protesting ain't gonna help you. Conservatives are the backbone of ICE right now, and they're bringing it stronger, and it desensitizes people. Like I said, it desensitizes people where they're now in cities and states, and courts can't do anything. It's designed to deport people, even though it came from a terrorist act, or a perceived terrorist act, and it had nothing to do with immigration. And we've just created this whole big thing where it turns America into a fortress state. The United States as a fortress state. And people would assume the same thing would happen to D.C. When that happens, no one in other countries, Western Europe, Canada, Mexico, Asia, all of them, in all the independent countries, Um, Especially the 75 that were just banned from visa travel, banned from having visas at all recently. Um, Forgot what I was about to say. Um, uh, yeah, the countries all the visa travel. They're they're of course gonna know the truth. Um, but I can't remember what I was gonna say. It was important though. Visa travel. Um, Canada, Mexico. Oh, I remember. Um, None of these countries would want to be in the same place, not even on the same planet as the United States. They want to be in a galaxy far, far away. March 5th, 2033. Remember that. Galaxy far, far away where they don't want nothing to do with the United States. They want it locked down. We don't want them. It's a movement. We don't want this. Ideology, United States ideology, as an ideology, it's not even political at this point. Between two things, it's them versus the world. But the only place that doesn't have that would be DC, and DC would be come and go as you please. You know, um, when they started the whole ICE thing, I was in DC, and if you know DC, they don't have ICE driving around. Now ICE does it exists all over the country, right? But it doesn't exist in trucks with guns in armored vehicles in DC. And you know, Chinatown, there's a lot of immigrants, mostly from Ethiopia. But you would think that that's a hot spot to use ICE because you got, there's times where you have to show IDs, there's times where you have to pay for things, debit cards, credit cards. They have all the information. But people aren't being taken off the streets, people aren't being robbed, you know. That ain't happening in DC. You would think that would happen in DC. It's a perfect place for it, but that's not the reality. It's happening in other places like Minnesota. It only happens at once every two places to get the views, to get the perception, and it desensitizes people. But yeah, DC does not operate like the rest of the United States because it's not part of the United States. It controls the United States, but it's not part of the United States. So yeah, I know that was a lot. That's a lot to take in. Hope you took notes. This is a very important conversation, and people think of it as politics. They think it's the ideology. Should people be deported or whatnot? Guys, it's beyond that. It really is. I mean, for some of y'all can already see the signs, see the writing on the wall. To me, it's just another stack, another piece of the puzzle. I already knew what was coming. But, you know, that's a problem for the future of America. You know, if people wonder where did they go wrong, and the stuff I know today, I know that one day this will just be common knowledge. You know, so you know, it's almost an hour that I've been recording in. I've said all the big stuff I needed to say. I know that people are gonna probably hate this video, if they've even made it this far. But, you know, they might not care now, or it might not make sense today, but one day they will see it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.